You are listening to the Emulsion Podcast, a show that informs and inspires the restaurant industry to work, live, and create better. My name is Justin Khanna. I'm a chef and media producer with almost 10 years of experience in award-winning restaurants all over the world. I created this show as a way to give back, to inspire the next generation, and help you progress your career. The Emulsion Podcast is sponsored by you folks, and Patreon is where that happens. If you're here as a return listener and enjoyed the episode you just came from and happen to want to support more episodes, visit patreon.com/Justin Khanna. I'd really appreciate it if you can. I totally understand if you can't. Free ways you can support this show include leaving a like or comment on this episode, filling up all 5 stars on iTunes so more people can find us, or simply sharing an episode with a friend. This is an interview episode. If you missed out on asking your burning question to today's guest, that's probably because you aren't following me on Instagram or Twitter. I use the handy dandy question feature in my Instagram stories, and I also start a thread for each guest on Twitter. So between the two of those, that's the best way to take advantage of the access I hope to bring you with this show and all of the interviews I do. Let's learn a little bit more about today's interviewee, shall we?
Shows like Forged in Fire, and they're like that, they see the glitz and glamour of the fire and hitting steel with a hammer on an anvil, but they don't realize like while it's nice to conceptualize and come up with a design, and it's even better to have a finished product, everything in between pretty much fucking sucks.
Totally.
It's all hard work, and it's all or it's super laborious, but the thing is that you have to be so good at each one of those steps, so you're setting yourself up for the next step to be that much easier and more efficient and better.
Totally.
And so that when you do end up with the final product, it's the absolute best that it can be.
What is up, folks? Welcome to episode 82 of the Emulsion Podcast. This is the flippening, if you will. Even numbered podcasts episodes are now interview shows, at least for this chapter, until I do something that flips it back the other way. My name is Justin Khanna, and today's guest is Mareko Maumasi, owner of Maumasi Fire Arts. And as sexy as that name is, Mareko is really the man behind these sexy knives. He makes all of them himself, at least for now. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got some of his work up on screen right now, so you can kind of get a sense of what he creates. But if I'm just in your ears, if you're listening to this just as a podcast, you should pull up his knives before you listen to this episode, and I really think that will give you some context to know exactly what we're talking about and why I think he's so talented. He's at Maumasi Fire Arts on Instagram if you need to look that up, but if not, it is linked up down below if you don't want to type that in. Him and I got connected through a prior podcast guest, actually. Derek Boogie and Mareko go way back, so this is actually shot in one of the private dining rooms at the restaurant that Derek is now executive sous chef at in Bellevue, which is kind of like on the east side of Seattle. It's a place called Ascend. It's a super high-end sushi and steak spot. So shout out to Chef Derek for the venue. This is a little bit more of a different perspective. As you hear me say in the interview, this was back in August, all the way back in August. So it is a different setup now, but this should be the last episode where you ever get the iPhone camera angle. Hope that's a good thing. I'm switching all interviews going forward to have a bit of a nicer setup. So yay for nice cameras. Anyways, in this interview, I ask questions like, what's the value in giving away all your trade secrets? What was it like to work under renowned bladesmith Bob Kramer? His worst fuck up on a knife blade that he's ever done, and I also share how you can book Mareko to come teach a knife care clinic at the restaurant that you might be working at. And then he will be able to dish out some of the knowledge to keep your knives sharp and stellar for years to come. But first, should him and I start making t-shirts?
I want to do a set, so I didn't like the set that's for knife makers and blacksmiths, but I want to do a set that is more like food oriented, something that chefs might want to wear underneath their gear and whatnot.
I've got a couple of requests for those.
Oh yeah?
But somebody requested black ones. Like, why would you do that?
Like you're black on black?
Yeah, well, like black undershirt with something that you could see through the chef coat.
Oh.
Which I guess is okay for some. I would never wear it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, especially in an open kitchen. I feel like that's bad. That's a bad move.
I always like to start with a State of the Union. Like, okay, where is your head at in, August of 2018?
Okay.
As far as, it can be anything from, because you dabble in chefs and knives and media now, and like, what are you excited about? What are you obsessed with?
Right. So as a custom knife maker, I think there's a huge opportunity for people to do more regarding just informing the customer base and kind of the audience in general. There's an kind of antiquated mindset amongst a lot of makers, where they think that, even 10, 20 years ago, they thought they really were kind of marketing to a very, very small number of people, maybe a couple thousand real like collectors in the country or around the world. But with the social media, it has created a huge opportunity, not only for makers to create a voice for themselves, but also for them to create an opportunity for people to find them. And because of social media, they're literally, we are now connected instead of to a couple thousand, like literally anybody in the fucking world that uses some form of social media. And even if half of 1% want the kind of work that I'm doing and some of my fellow knife makers are doing, that's millions of fucking people. And that means to me that that antiquated mindset of competition is out the window. There's no longer competition because of that large of a number. We'll never be able to serve them, because essentially the supply versus the demand. The demand is super high, the supply is teeny weeny. I just said teeny weeny.
Recorded. It's recorded.
It's on record. No, but realistically, like especially when you get as narrow as to where I'm at. I make fully forged, custom handmade chef's knives. I have a hard time, off the top of my head, thinking of more than a dozen people who are doing a good job in the country. And so I guess the thing that I'm, long story short, is most excited about is just the opportunity for people to start swapping that mindset and realizing like there's a huge opportunity to educate the customer base, because there are a lot of people like trying to shill a bunch of bullshit out there, and I think the opportunity is to help better educate those customers. And because of the lack of competition, whether they buy a knife from me or from my buddy Don or Ian or whoever they buy a knife from, they're making an informed decision versus it looks like the other stuff, but is it the same? No, most of the time it's not. And you can really see the difference between, a full-on custom handmade knife, especially one that's made well by one of those top dozen makers in the country or around the world, and versus any commercially manufactured thing. And it's all in the details, but there's also the opportunity to connect with that person and the history that they kind of represent, because reality is like out of ancient man, as an animal we could do pretty much everything, but we didn't really have claws like other animals. We have our incisors, but that doesn't really do that doesn't go very far when it comes to tearing things apart. And so the knife was like our first necessity. And a lot of people like to talk about how prostitution is like the oldest trade, but I actually think tool making is the oldest trade, because we needed tools to get the job done so we could keep living on.
It's true.
Yeah.
Was there a point where it flipped in your head where you were like, I don't have to worry about, people are coming to me now. Like, was there a point, because I mean, you haven't been doing it for crazy long, but you've been doing it for long enough. Was there a point when you realized that there was actually potential and this was like a move that you were willing to make?
You mean in doing custom knives full time? Or?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, when I first started this, like 5 years ago now, the question was kind of, what do I need to survive? At the time, I was a single guy, renting a room out of a friend's house, and so I didn't really need a whole lot. So to go full time and do this full time, I only needed like maybe $1,000 a month. And so once I got to the point where I was selling my work consistently enough that I was making that, I was like, okay, done doing the other stuff, which was working restaurants and stuff. An easy
trade-off.
Yeah, pretty easy at the time, and then
I did want to dive into that though, the restaurant part.
Okay.
Because I mean, there's a lot of line cooks and sous chefs and culinary school students listening.
Yeah.
You went to restaurants, and then you play a little back and forth. Where does that story fit in, and what kept bringing you back?
Yeah. So, I never was very good at school. I love learning shit. I hate doing the schoolwork.
Sure.
The busy work always seemed like bullshit to me, because I was like, if I'm interested in it and I like it, if it's compulsory, I have a hard time saying, or I guess in general, I have a hard time having people tell me what to do. That's probably a big reason why I like working for myself.
Yep.
But you know, just as a necessity to pay bills and stuff, I started working in restaurants, and nothing crazy. Like I always worked in like little bakeries or, you know, taverns or pubs or, you know, sports bars or whatever.
In the kitchen.
In the kitchen.
Got
I was
it.
always back of house.
Yeah.
Because I was always I've never been like a public persona in a way, even when it comes to being front of house and fucking serving people and talking to customers. What do you want? Or telling them the special, like
Sure.
Just that whole idea. Like I've always, it's only really been in the last couple of years where I've started, I feel like, coming to my own, and I'm like doing presentations and talking to people.
Totally.
But all through high school, I always avoided those, and growing up and stuff. And so, yeah, I was always back of house. And so I worked in restaurants on and off for like a cumulative of like 7 years. And again, it was always, you know, anywhere from washing dishes to prepping to being on the line and stuff like that. But it was when I was 24, I'd gotten kicked out of AmeriCorps, and I was back in my hometown working in a restaurant that I'd worked at before I went into AmeriCorps. And but I didn't know what the fuck I was doing with myself. And I was also actually assistant teaching salsa dancing lessons, and excuse me. And that's always an interesting trivia point for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But, my friend that I was assisting in classes and public performances and stuff like that, she had just started working for a guy doing kind of like his book work. And so, again, like I said, I didn't know what the hell I was doing myself. And she's like, you should meet this guy I started working for. He's really interesting. He's been all over the place, traveled the world. He's even been a clown in Ringling Barnum and Bailey. And I was like, what? Okay. And she's like, I think you guys really hit it off. So I was like, all right, well, who is he? What does he do? And she's like, oh, he's a bladesmith. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
She's like, well, you know, like in a reenactment village and there's like a blacksmith. I was like, okay. She's like, well, he does that, but it's focused around knives. I'm just like, people still do that today? And so she's like, he's a really neat guy. I think you guys should meet. And so I met up with him for what I thought was just going to be bullshitting over beers and fish and chips. And it ended up being like an hour-long interview. And to find out later, he didn't even know that he was going to offer me an opportunity to work in his shop. But the guy is Bob Kramer, who's pretty well known around the world. You know, now I think his legend really blew the fuck up into like 10 years ago, 2008 November. I think that's when the New Yorker article dropped.
I remember that.
And so in that, me and him BSing, he offered me an opportunity to work in the shop, and that was just before the New Yorker article dropped. And he had like he'd been mentioned in Savor, he'd been mentioned in Cooks Illustrated, just like one of the little side corner thing where they're doing the price comparison and whatnot. And he, from those past experiences, he was getting like blasted with a bunch of orders. And basically it's kind of a bad move to do something like that and then not be prepared. Yeah. So he knew this article was coming out. He knew he was going to need some help, and he was already backlogged, I believe at that point, about 2.5 years. And so, and he was anticipating taking on more with the influx of interest. So he pulled me into the shop and, you know, kind of did the can't promise you anything, can't even promise I can pay you full time.
Totally.
And so he started me out like reorganizing and cleaning up his whole shop, like 2,500 square foot shop. And I think the goal there was kind of to see, you know, what will he do and at what level of detail will he do it. And I fucking completely redetailed the whole shop, reorganized everything. He was like, okay, cool. So he started me in on some of the more kind of like the minor processes, and then the knife making the whole like creation of a custom made knife. And all in all, by the time I was done there, you know, I was forging the Damascus for the blades. I was doing kind of the work to cut out the blades and grind them, and assembling handles and doing all handle sculpting and stuff. But it was a great opportunity to kind of dip my toes into the whole world, because up to that point I'd never done any kind of metalworking. Yeah. I'd always done like woodworking, and ever since like I was a little kid, I loved like slamming nails with wood. You know, we always had my stepdad at the time had worked for a construction place, so he's always bringing home shit to burn in the wood pile. I was always building stuff out of it because he always had nails kicking around. And so it was working with my hands, but in a completely different medium.
Sure.
And I was good at it. But up to that point in my life, I've always been a kinesthetic learner. And so, I always pick things up really super fucking quick. Yeah, like the salsa dancing. I learned pretty much everything my partner had spent the last 10, 15 years learning. I learned in 3 months.
Wow.
I learned how to snowboard in about an hour, and we were up at like Snoqualmie Pass, and we were blasting down the hill at like 40 fucking miles an hour by the end of the day. I learned how to like slalom ski, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. From watching a friend do it for 40 minutes off the back of the boat. They're just like, all right, get out there. And I was like, okay. And I was like, I was carving back. It's just weird. It's always been how I've learned. It's something about like paying attention to whatever kind of odd nuances and studying like actual like movements instead of seeing it as the overall whole thing. I'm seeing all the tiny little details.
Interesting.
And so, yeah.
Where does that come from for you?
I have no
I have so many
clue.
questions I want to dive deeper into.
I have no idea where that comes from. It's just kind of always like I taught myself how to play guitar.
Yeah.
And just I don't know. It's just always been. I started referring to it as like a physical intelligence in a way. Mm-hmm. Not that I really think I'm intelligent. It's just for some reason I can pick shit up.
Yeah, it is a thing. Did you ever get your wife into salsa?
She's always been interested in doing it, but especially since our little guys have been born and I'm working full time, doing the knife making outside of that, it's been like take care of the dude.
Yep.
And then once he goes to sleep, I just want to veg out on the couch for an hour before passing out. So we haven't really done a whole lot of that yet, but she's into it.
My girlfriend is dying to just like when we go to a wedding, be able to like bust it out on the dance floor. And I'm the worst dancer.
Okay.
So she's
Century Ballroom up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, we took for Valentine's Day. We took a foxtrot class or something like that.
Sure.
I still need hella practice. Just it is.
There's a lot of great resources, amazingly online, but it's not the same as actually having somebody physically there coaching you and being able to grab your foot and say, "What the fuck are you doing? Put it over here."
Yep. I want to go back to Bob Kramer for a second.
Sure.
Were there any? I mean, you talked about like coming in those initial jobs that you did, were there any initial like memorable failures under him? And if you had that process to work through it, was it self-directed or if?
It was, I don't know. I don't know how to describe the learning process. A lot of it was essentially watch how I do this, or this is my process, and him walking me through it.
Sure.
And essentially, he would show me it once, and then he'd go away, and I'd have to repeat it. And then based on how that's going, he decided if I needed a little bit more coaching or whatever. But for the most part, I got it on the first time around. And I don't know. It's he was also very forgiving and understanding that it's a completely different thing. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of people who are listening to this now and being like, wait, what?
Yeah.
He heats up metal and hits it with a hammer. Like, what the fuck?
Sure.
And that's kind of where I was at. And so he understands that there's going to be a learning curve. And so I think that's one of the things I could really be thankful for, that he was very forgiving in that way. And fortunately, I think I know there was definitely one knife that I fucked up, and it had to just get tossed, which was a bummer. And it was a Damascus knife, so it was like the most expensive side of things. But
do you remember why it was fucked up?
It was still when I was early in my handle sculpting. Mm-hmm. And I'd gone just a little bit too deep in one of the areas and gotten to a part that essentially made it was in the bolster, on the front side of the bolster of the knife, and I'd cut too deep and I got down to clean steel. And at that point, there's really no I've ground all the way through like the mechanical attachments that keep it like physically in place, and so at that point it's just floating there. And when it's just floating there like that, that's no fucking good. And so that had to get trashed, and that was probably like $5,000-$6,000 at the time knife. Damn. That just had to go out the window.
Shit.
Which is a bummer. And I've definitely adopted his kind of mindset in the way that these things, when they leave your shop, they're out there in the world for the rest of your life, and in your knife, or your name is on that product.
Yep.
And so when something like that would happen, if there was a big mistake, or even like making the steel, if for whatever reason the steel wasn't etching as cleanly as he would have liked, he's like, nope. And he'd put it in the chop saw and fucking chop the fucking thing up and throw it in the garbage. And he'd rather start over. And so I have quite a collection of kind of first times and what I consider fuck ups. And it's just a tool chest drawer full of knives that are just sitting there. They're fine. They'll be useful somewhere else. But it's like, I've been trying to develop a pattern, and it didn't come out the way that I wanted. And while it's still a nice pattern, I'm fucking pissed because it didn't work. So I'm just like, go away. And a lot of my friends are like, send that my way, I'll finish it out. And I was like, no.
Well, I can only imagine
want that to be out there.
I can only imagine like those values that instilled in you.
For sure.
To like, I was listening to a podcast the other day where this lady was talking about how her dad, whenever she did something, would always ask her, "Is this world class?" And that was like a very like pivotal moment for her to like think about. And the similarities are very similar, where you can only imagine. All of that.
Yeah, I work in a shop with 3 other guys, kind of a cooperative space, and often they're like, "What are you doing, man? Just finish it up and get it out of here."
Yeah.
And I don't know. They say that I wear stained glasses and I see all the mistakes instead of all the successes.
Sure.
But like you were saying, like, is this world class? I'm always striving every knife I build to make that best knife that I possibly can right there in that moment.
Sure.
Obviously you could spend 20 years building a knife. It's never going to be perfect. But at that moment in time, what is a marker of your level of skill? And it's interesting doing a thing over and over. There's always an opportunity for improvement, I think.
Sure.
I think if you're not looking for that opportunity to learn more, to become more efficient in your process, your skills, whatever you're doing for, whether you're doing your mise en place or if you're fucking building a knife, there's always an opportunity to learn, become more efficient. And I think if you're not doing that, you're becoming a little complacent in a way. And so it's looking for those opportunities. I've sculpted hundreds of handles, and I'm still learning how to become more efficient and more exacting and precise in that process. And I love it. That's the trick, is loving the process.
Sure. No
matter fucking how arduous. Everybody, they'll come up to me and they'll be like, "You're a bladesmith? You make knives? That sounds so fucking cool." And they see the shows like Forged in Fire, and they're like, that they see the glitz and glamour of the fire and hitting steel with a hammer on an anvil, but they don't realize like while it's nice to conceptualize and come up with a design, and it's even better to have a finished product, everything in between pretty much fucking sucks.
Totally.
It's all hard work, and it's all or it's super laborious. But the thing is that you have to be so good at each one of those steps, so you're setting yourself up for the next step to be that much easier and more efficient and better.
Totally.
And so that when you do end up with the final product, it's the absolute best that it can be at that moment in time.
Correct. I don't want to make this whole show about Bob Kramer, but I do have one more quick question about it, because there's so much value in the fact that you essentially had no idea who he was before you started working for him. And I think it's very similar in the kitchen sense, where it's like you see these guys on the tops of the list, or they have the stars, or they have the articles, and you want to go work for them.
Sure.
But I think there's so much more immense value that comes from kind of like getting in on the ground floor with something like that. Do you think there's more value? Would you go work for Bob Kramer 5 years ago as opposed to when you started? Or do you think that all the value is gone because they're at a different place than completely being hands-on with you at that stage, I guess?
Right. I think it would have been a very different experience if I had come into it knowing who Bob was and kind of seeking him out in the same way you're talking about people seeking out stages around the world, especially in France and all over the place. It definitely would have been a different story. And like I said, up to that point in my life, I'd always pick things up really easily. And so to me, at the time, I was like, oh, there's just another thing that I'm good at. And I think I really lacked an awareness of how special of an opportunity that it was.
Sure.
And that I not only was I going to be good at it, but I realized later after I had parted ways with Bob that I was actually, that might have been up to that point in my life the only thing that I could say that I was actually great at, and I was like, fuck, I got to get back into that.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it definitely would have been a different story if I had gone into it, you know, seeking it out. I don't know. Yeah, if, you know, coming at it from pretty much like know nothing perspective, I think it probably did have some benefits where I didn't have any, like I wasn't putting any pressure on myself in any way.
Totally.
To you know, make the best fucking work or try to strive for Bob Kramer's level when I'm like at zero, or impress him or anything.
Yeah.
He was really good in the way, like he was like I said, he was very forgiving, especially understanding the learning curve. But in mentorship wise, you know, he just, you know, we spent a lot of time just BSing and hanging out as well. We always started our day off with like a half hour of just like, you know, what's coming up next, where do we got to go, what's going on in your life, kind of stuff like that, and just talking about life in general. And you know, like at that point, I was like 26 and he was 52 when we parted ways. And so it was kind of interesting to be at that, where essentially I was at his half-life point. And so it was really interesting to have that kind of relationship, especially as well as, you know, I didn't really have a very strong father figure growing up.
Sure.
So I really looked up to him in that way as well, because he kind of filled that role. And all throughout my life, actually, up to that point, you know, I had like coaches or I had teachers that I really looked up to. But, you know, after I graduated high school, like I was just kind of a little fuck off shit kid. And didn't really have anybody or any kind of like structure, anybody to really look up to until I had met Bob. And so, but if I were to go into it from, you know, dabbling in it some myself, it definitely, I think it would have been, I don't know, I mean, I can't really say, obviously, because that's not the perspective I came from, but I feel like I would have had some more of that pressure to impress him, to, as well as like what kind of expectations that he might have had on me, instead of being just like an entirely blank slate. And it's interesting how that gives him the opportunity to just train me from the ground up exactly how he wants shit made, versus me coming into it with kind of like a lacking objectivity.
Totally.
I feel like more and more people are actually looking for kind of people who have skills, but also who have the flexibility to be a blank slate and learn. Like, sure, you know how to meese all fucking day long at that place, but when you come here, this is how we're gonna do it.
Totally.
And so, I think it's better actually that I came into it as a blank slate. Yeah.
Flipping it to where you are now, I want to talk a little bit about how I mean, there's a reason you have all these media opportunities. There's a reason you have such a large following on social. Like, there's a reason that your books are almost full, right?
Yeah.
Why flip the script? Like, you're more or less getting all this recognition on the internet, whereas the person who you trained under was getting it all in old media and magazines and all that stuff. Where does that come from for you? Like,
I mean, I stink.
Yeah.
Fuck, Jesus. I think that there's still obviously a lot of great value, especially when it comes to kind of leveraging the names of like Savor or even New York or something like that. Lends credibility to any kind of essentially brand, any solo knife maker or anybody like crochet artist or something, like their brand. And so being in different especially print publications, lends a lot of credibility. But it is interesting, the difference between, you know, even when Bob was essentially rising up to where we are now 10 years later, 12 years later, whatever. Especially in a social media world, there's a lot of noise out there. And I think the old school mindset, a lot of people think that it's, oh, you just got to put up a couple pictures or whatever, and you get all the accolades, and you got all these people liking your shit and whatnot. But the reality is, everybody has a fucking voice. What is it? It's like 5 billion people on Instagram or some shit.
Well, they have 500 million active users or something like that. It's crazy. It's crazy. No, you're fine.
Okay, but so there are a lot of fucking people.
Sure.
And so it's cutting through all that noise, because now whether they actually know what the fuck they're talking about, or if they don't, they all have an equal opportunity to make some sound into their phone and then post it up out in the world. And so I tried to, I think the only way that I could really cut through and make a difference is by sharing what I know. At first, it was kind of a mission to kind of stamp out the bullshit that a lot of people try to peddle.
Interesting.
Because essentially there's a lot, and it's always going to continuously go on, but there's a lot of misinformation. There are a lot of kind of armchair experts throwing Hail Marys, saying that this, that, or the other, and being very prescriptive about what style knife you should be using, what kind of steel it should be made from. And the reality is, like, no, whatever you want to use, like, if it suits you, use it. But I think my mission started out as trying to silence them, to essentially, like, help the end consumer, or even if somebody wants to be an armchair expert, like, just to have better information.
Totally. And
it's been through doing that I've kind of become a resource and a place where people go to learn some shit, all the way from the end consumers to other actual makers. Like, I have custom knife makers who've been making knives for 30 years, and they're like, dude, what you're doing, especially when it comes to, like, the pattern welding, is blowing my fucking mind. I've never seen anybody do that, and I'm just like, and part of it, like, just really on a quick tangent, like, just that small part of what I do is doing the pattern welded steel, the Damascus. In the first couple of years doing it on my own, I don't know how many people I heard, especially the old guys doing or saying, like, all the patterns have been made. Nobody's doing it. You can alter, like, the starting stack, but it's all been done. And I'm like, that's fucking crazy. How can you really think that? Because the reality is, modern Damascus making has only been around for like 50 years. It pretty much died out with the advent of just more economical ways for steel to be made in, like, Indonesia and India and kind of the metal capitals of the world. And so I'm doing everything. I feel like I'm constantly trying to go against the grain and tell everybody, fuck you, you're wrong.
Sure.
I don't know if that even answers your question.
No, but well, you're giving access in addition to your product, right? And I think another thing that's really, that we haven't even touched on is that, like, first and foremost, your product is fucking good. You know what I mean? And then you started doing the social media stuff. You know what I mean? Though, because, like, again, because you can sit and talk about, oh, I make knives and I have this knowledge, and you might have all the knowledge in the world, but to have the product that's good first, and then give that, like, do you think going forward, if having the great product and then learning how to kind of, like, do the media stuff was the generation before you? Because I think about it now, like, being a chef, giving access to, like, TV people. Now it's like, if you don't have any, I try to do a pop-up, and the venue, one of the first questions the venue asks is, what's your presence on social?
Sure.
And as much as I hate that question, you know what I mean? Like, it's a bullshit question, but it is how it is. Like, do you think that if someone were to, if, like, the generation under you were to come work for you, that would be something that you would try to, like, instill in them, is, like, figure out a way to give access and education and, like,
bring value.
Yeah, bring value in addition to what you do. Do you think that's a prerequisite, or do you think it's?
No, I don't think it is. I think that, for me, from a craftsperson perspective, I think it's important to know your craft first before going out there and trying to spout off about it. Because essentially, if you don't know, like, I could make a hunting knife, right? I can probably make a pretty good fucking hunting knife. But the reality is, I've never hunted anything, ever. I've never skinned an animal. I've never broken down an animal, done any kind of butchery of any kind. So while I could make a really good tool based on information available to me, as well as talking to the end user or my customer, as well as talking to other makers who specialize in this, I could never stand behind that and say, this is the best fucking hunting knife you might ever use in your life.
Totally.
it could be, but I could never stand behind it. But so that's why I focus on chef's knives, is because, you know, I have my experience working in restaurants, blasting through food, and kind of a production environment, as well as cooking at home. And I have pretty solid knife skills for a custom knife maker. And I think being able to coming at it from that perspective of knowing how to use the tool is really important before you even turn around trying to spout off. So if you're trying to get into something and you've never actually done it, like, you know, there are tons of people who want to talk a lot of shit about wine, beer, spirits, whatever. They've never even read the stuff. They're just reading like the magazines or reviews and stuff, and it's like they're headline readers. And they're just regurgitating stuff, because I think humans on a base level, they want to feel like a level of expertise in something. And with like, how many people are here in Seattle? There's like 5 million people in this city. I'm just gonna keep throwing out numbers I don't fucking know.
What percentage of Instagram is from Seattle?
You know, it's just, I guess the point is that, you know, it's easy to spout off a bunch of knowledge and not actually know what you're talking about. So I think, you know, if you're gonna try to get into, if you're trying to get into something, you know, do it first. Get your hands dirty. You know, there are all types of groups on social media, especially on like Facebook, where people are like, based around knife making. They're like, especially for beginners, there's like knife making or beginning bladesmithing or something group, and people are spouting off all this stuff, this, that, or the other. I heard from this credible source. It's like, that might work for him, but might not work for somebody else based on their actual setup in their shop. And, you know, there's so many variables that play into being good at something. You know, you know, the old adage that, you know, there are 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Like, there are a lot of different ways to approach things. And so.
Do you have any advice for anyone that's wanting to get like their first nice knife? Like, what are some things that you kind of look for that, you know, if your mom or your sibling was going to get into their first nice knife, what would you tell them?
Sure. So that's actually a question I get a lot when I get emails, people requesting knives or information on knives. And the first thing after they say I'm interested is, I don't actually know what to fucking buy, and especially if they're buying it as a gift for somebody else. And so my first advice is, figure out what knife they use the most. Stay within your comfort zone before you start, especially if you're going to try to up your game. Stay in your comfort zone. Figure out if you're buying it for somebody else as a gift for your son who's graduating, CIA or whatever. What are they using? And is it kind of a Japanese ideology based around knives, or is it a more European ideology based? You know, Japanese are obviously going to be a little bit on the lighter side, but that's also because they're high carbon steel, and so they don't need all that extra mass to help support the leading cutting edge. Or on a European side, they're using more stainless stuff, and because it's stainless, it needs that extra material and bulk. And they also come from the perspective of one knife, or in general, trying to create a knife that covers a vast spectrum of processes, anywhere from what you might use a utility knife for, all the way up to like a slicing knife. Where in like the Japanese ideology, there's a knife for every single process. And
do you fall in that camp of there's like, or somewhere in the middle? Like, where's your head at?
I'm more of the kind of, I try to keep, I don't really have a kit, but if I had a kit, it'd be fucking basic. It'd be a chef's knife, a small, like a 3.5 inch, maybe 4 inch paring knife. And then, like a 9.5 inch, maybe 10 inch chef's knife. And that's if I'm not on the line. If I'm doing prep, I prefer, I can handle a bigger knife, so I'll do a bigger knife. And then maybe a bread knife. But it's,
Would you ever do like back to that physical learning thing, would you ever like do a full deep dive into like using a Deba or a...
Fuck. I would love to. I have this pipe dream of traveling around the world, and actually, like I said before, I've never hunted, but going and working with a hunter and really going through the whole step in the process and understanding from their perspective and getting my hands dirty why a knife is designed the way it is. And even still, like, so many different hunters do things 100 different ways.
Yeah.
So that still would be challenging to really say this is the best way. But to actually go in and get my hands there, and then go to Japan and go to the fish market and fucking watching these people blast in through the fish.
Or like the specialty ones, like for the eel, like the one that's like the offset. It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's insane. Do you know Josh Skeens at all from Saison?
I don't.
He might be a good guy to connect with.
Okay.
He does, he has a 3 Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco, but he also has a ranch where he does, like, he'll go out and bring down a big fucking animal, butcher it, and then invite, like, a couple of tech startup millionaires from San Francisco out to his ranch and do, like, a full blown out evening at his ranch. That could be cool if you want to get into the hunting thing. Like, because really he comes from the chef and hunting, like, he grew up in the backwoods of, like, Florida in the swamps, like, wrestling gators. And
Jesus.
Yeah, he's, like, crazy.
I'll pass on that, but I'll help do the butchery. I would love to do that.
So taking more steps up, going to a knife like yours, if I'm a chef customer and I'm wanting to get one of your knives, what does that process look like?
I consider myself essentially like a tailor of cutlery. So if you want a tailored suit, you go somewhere where they take all the measurements and all the different details. I do the same thing with my chef's knives. I talk to the person about what first thing, what knife are they most comfortable using? Because they're like, a lot of people will be like, I want a full set, and I'm like, you don't need a full fucking set, especially if you're a home cook. Like, I know you're using one knife. You gravitate to that one knife every fucking time, no matter what you're doing. So what is that knife? Secondly, what are you actually cooking? What are you using that knife with? Are you doing a lot of stuff where it's going to be maybe coming in contact with bones, either through fish or chicken or whatever? Or are you on a vegan diet and you're only hitting vegetation or any, like, pretty much all boneless stuff?
Sure.
That informs me on how the knife needs to be ground, how it needs to be heat treated, what kind of edge geometry it needs. And then when it comes to the rest of the stuff, it's, especially when it comes to handle size. I work with people who are anywhere from like 4 foot nothing to 6 foot crazy something. And that's another thing that I can actually do is make a knife handle larger or smaller, and that may seem like an unnecessary step, but the reality is, like, the blade is the business end, but you have the relationship with that tool through the handle.
That's where it contacts.
Yeah, and so for it to feel like a natural extension of your hand, of your body, so that you can have the most control over it. I try to design knives that you don't ever want to put down. And I've received tons of emails after customers get a knife saying, I don't have anything left in the house to cut. Like, we fucking cut up everything. Your knife showed up today. We have to go shopping tomorrow now so we can cut up more stuff. And it's a whole different game when you have a knife that's built for you. And so, and then also when it comes to the actual grind, I can do almost any grind. Actually, I haven't done a lot of like a Yanagiba or anything like that, where it has the aura on the back. But I have the equipment for doing that. I have the skills to do that. I just haven't really gotten a lot of orders.
Sure.
But yeah, I feel very fortunate that I have a solid base and my ability to learn the way I do, that I can kind of look at stuff and be like, okay, I'm gonna make that shit happen.
Totally.
And so I can do pretty much anything, which is why I call myself a tailor of cutlery. Where a lot of makers, not to talk anybody down, they have their lane and they stay in it because that's what they know works. Especially when they come from a background that isn't necessarily culinary driven, or they don't have that experience working in kitchens or using a knife for hours upon hours, day after day, week after week, and so on. It's hard to try to expand your your mindset or your approach when you have a very limited experience. And so yeah, I pretty much do whatever the only thing I don't do, and the thing I've said no to the most, is people saying, I want a Bob Kramer knife, or I want a Haber knife, or I want a Bill Burke knife, or something like that. And I'm like
just because I can doesn't mean I will.
Exactly. I could fucking copy anybody all day long, but I don't.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that orders like that would come in.
Oh yeah, for sure. And part of it is like, it's hard to get a hold of the Kramer. So people, and essentially I'm like the closest thing, being having worked under him, and also being a high level knife maker, to getting kind of a Kramer.
Totally.
But again, like I when people come to me and say that, I have no problem saying no. I'm like, you know what, if you want one of those, either get the commercial thing or get the real thing. But I'm not ripping off anybody's thing, their style, because I'm here to share my approach and my perspective on knife making. And I do have, my handle style is a little bit different. I do my integral bolsters different on my forged knives. And that's all based around my experience working in kitchens and being like, fuck, why is this handle like this? Or why is the spine, like, why don't they break the edge of the spine? Or, why isn't the bolster more at an angle to kind of, for it to be a little more ergonomic and comfortable in the pinch grip? So when I got into knife making knives under my own brand, my own way, I also had the opportunity to do all that. And it seems to be working. Do
most of these conversations that you'll have with people happen over the phone, over email?
Yeah, mostly through email.
Yeah.
And the biggest reason I try to keep everything steered towards email, a lot of people do talk on the phone, but I always do follow up emails. It's just because of organizational purposes, especially when, I have a backlog of going on 3 years now. There's the initial contact where we figure out what they're looking for, quote a price, and then I pretty much, like, I'm open to people reaching out and talking to me all whatever, but most of the time, I would say probably like 98% of the time
is email.
I don't hear, I just don't, there's no conversation until it's like a month out, and I'll be like, hey, I'm getting ready to start your order in about a month.
Sure.
These are the details we talked about before. Is that still what you're looking for? Because almost 100% of the time, people change their minds because of something they see me do through Instagram.
Yep.
And I'm constantly coming up with new patterns, new handle styles, working with new handle materials. So like, I just saw that shit you did a week ago. I want that.
Sure.
Or whatever. And so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have you had any struggles with kind of like attempting to scale that one-on-one interact? I mean, like, I try to keep my dinner events super small because like the event I did last night, I was able to connect with every single person at the table because it was only
That's
8
awesome.
people.
Yeah.
And it was like, I could be like, hey, I chose this cabbage at the market this morning because I know you spent time in Norway and this is the name of the whatever. You know what I mean?
That's incredible.
Like, it's so frustrating to try to scale that sometimes because it's like, sometimes you just can't. Have you run into any, like, you're happy with where that's at? Do you see any?
I'm definitely not happy with where it's at. I feel, unfortunately, that I could definitely do a better job of creating that kind of customer experience.
Sure.
And part of the reason it lacks, and it's kind of very like business-like, unfortunately, right now, is because of the backlog. And so moving from the West Coast to the East Coast also killed like work time, as well as doing intermittent shows and trade shows and stuff like that. That also takes me out of the shop, so I'm just not getting work done. So that every time that happens, I fall back, and so then it's getting caught up on knives and just getting the bare bones information. But I would really love to get to that place where I can create a better customer experience, as well, like all the way down to packaging. Like, unfortunately, like even the knives come in a padded case, but it could definitely be stepped up for sure. Then I'm getting ready to close my books so that I can do work to get caught up, and then kind of ideally swap over my business model in a way where I'm taking fewer custom orders and doing more kind of ready-made stuff.
Sure.
That way people can get stuff more immediately.
Sure.
And then if they really want something super unique and special, then we'll move on with the custom order stuff.
Yep.
But until I can get better caught up, unless there's somebody out there that really is looking to help a brother out, it's kind of what it is, and I've been doing more work to get more organized as well. I've like essentially a worksheet that I work through now, all the different kind of main phases of the build process, and so every time I hit one of those new phases, I'm sending it kind of like a progress update, and just again creating a better customer experience, so that they feel like I'm thinking of them,
totally,
right? And
totally.
they're on my mind, and so.
What would be one of a few of those, like, if you were to bring someone on, those initial kind of like things you would delegate out of the whole, like, think of like zooming out whole process? Sure. Because Bob Kramer did a couple of things with you when you came on. What would be those first few things you would kind of dish out to someone? Yeah.
So like I was saying, my goal is to get to a point where I'm taking fewer custom orders and do more ready-made stuff, and I think that's where the opportunity is to scale. And that's by doing essentially kind of it'd be all in-house, but it would be more on a production level, so less kind of like fine detail, like hand sanding and shit like that.
Sure.
Because reality is, like, when it comes to actual performance of the tool and how it feels, those small details, while they're nice, they're not necessarily like, you'd rather get it for a better price or a more attainable price.
Sure.
To skip that kind of stuff. So I mean, and it would probably follow along the production model that Bob kind of laid out, which is kind of pretty basic, which is, cut out a knife, drill holes, profile the knife, and teaching like the primary grinding. I have been thinking about the idea of, if I get to a point, how do I scale? How do I pass on the knowledge and information to do this shit? And I've done a lot of just like my own internal work, and kind of actually changing the way I do stuff, so that I can turn around and pass things on to people.
Sure.
In a way where they can learn it in a pretty short order.
Would you still do like the super crazy custom?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's where you're.
I mean, my dream position would be like to have like a commercially made line like Bob's got, and then do the in-house full production, to have essentially like kind of different tiers. And then at the very top tier, I would love to be at a point where, the business is self-sustaining in a good way. I'm solid when it comes to money.
Sure. And
I would actually love to do my crazy, like, new Damascus using all kinds of whatever, and then donate that to a good cause.
Dope.
Because I'm good over with the other stuff. Sure, getting a bunch of money for something would be awesome, but also at the same time, like, if you're good, you're good. Like, I don't know, I came up from like a humble background, and like I didn't know what real butter tasted like until I was in like high school.
Damn.
Yeah, like we would eat leftover rice. We would pour milk over it with some and not even real milk. It was powdered milk.
Yeah.
Which is delicious.
Damn.
And so you're fucking coating that thing with as much sugar as you possibly can. Like, that's how I grew up.
Yeah.
Hamburger Helper was my best friend.
Sure.
Shit like that.
My mom made that.
Yeah.
It's true.
So when it comes to money, I don't know. I'm terrible with the business side, because I constantly am trying to like give shit away or donate to stuff. And
sure.
And the reality is, like, we're not necessarily at that point yet, but this is the first time in my life I feel like I have something that I can really give back with or help other people with.
Totally.
Yeah.
Interesting. If you had to pick one or two nuggets of advice or moments when you really started to feel like you developed your own style after like going out on your own, were there certain moments where you're like, you saw something or got inspiration from something, or you like, you've always wanted to see if this would work and it finally did? Was there any moments like that?
Yeah, I think so. Like I was saying before, I have my perspective on which I approach chef's knives, and I think the reason I can do that is because I have experience using it. I think the best contributions come from people who are trying to solve a problem. And, if you don't know how something's used, you don't have any way of identifying any problems or how to make changes or how to improve something. And so I think people just need to understand the tool best, either through learning how to use it themselves, taking cooking classes, taking knife skill classes, or just watching YouTube videos on knife skills and shit like that.
Sure.
Or developing a relationship with working chefs, of a good spectrum, because there are people who work directly with one chef, but again, that chef has their perspective. I think having kind of a more spread out group to pick from is useful. But I think to really have something to contribute, you got to know how it's used.
Empathy.
Yeah.
I want you to plug your knife clinics, because I know that there's people listening that would love to have you at the restaurant they work at, or come to their school, or like whatever.
Sure, so something I'm looking at trying to do more, and I'm actually here at Ascend to do today, is kind of a mini knife care clinic. And the basic thing is my basic goal is to help people better understand their tools. And like I said at the beginning, like, because there's so many people who are interested in the level of work that I'm doing, and there's such a small supply, I actually feel fine educating people on how to take care of the knives they already have, so that they ideally don't have to buy another knife for maybe another 10, 20 years down the road versus, a couple of years, or ever even buy a knife from me because the knife they got's working so well. So I'm trying to cruise around and do these knife care clinics to just help people understand what's actually going on with their knife along the cutting edge, on like a microscopic level, and then also based on the materials that they're made of, what's happening, and then kind of the basic information, or not basic, but just like essentially five key points to helping your knife last for as long as possible.
Sure.
And the reality is, like, if people really understood how to take care of their knives, fucking things could last 50 to 100 years, which sounds mind-boggling in a world where people are easily replacing their phones every couple of years and dropping $1,000 on a new phone.
Sure.
And all kinds of stuff, I think, and obviously that's going to be different based on if you are in a production environment, like, you're fucking beating that thing up, and it's a tool. It's meant to do the job.
Yep.
And, it is going to wear down and it needs to be tuned up. It's just like taking care of a car. But you got to know what's going on to really do the right things. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there, even in the professional environment, and a lot of it, it's getting passed down from, whoever's in charge,
it's a game
who's
of
the head
telephone.
chef.
Yeah.
And actually, that's like fucking perfect. And the reality, like, it blows me away, some of the shit that professionals are talking about when they're talking to me about their knives, and I know that this does that thing because of it. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's not how that works.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, there's an opportunity to help people out.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm still a young business, so I'm trying to get my name out there more.
Yep.
And I figure the best way to do it is by doing these clinics, by bringing value to people, help them with the tools. And what's hilarious is, like, I'm doing this, I don't even have anything to try to sell, because I got, like I said, I'm going on 3-year backlog. Like, I'm not trying to sell anything.
Totally.
I just want to help. Like, I realized, like, just in the last year, like, by helping people and creating, like, becoming like the nice knife whisperer or some shit like that.
Sure.
There's an opportunity to kind of create a stronger kind of legacy and a stronger brand.
It's gonna grow and evolve, obviously. But
for sure,
if you show up to a restaurant like today or tomorrow or next week, the cooks come with like their bag of knives, and you kind of just go through each one, like different ones, and you look at the edge and you say, this needs a little bit of help. Do you bust out some stones and show them?
I mean, so we could do a deep dive like that, but I can keep it as tight as like 15 minutes.
Okay.
Or, if the place has the time, I can go on for 3 hours.
Sure.
And really get into the actual, like, how to do shit.
Totally.
But in general, it's just, people don't understand what's, like I was saying, like what's actually happening at a microscopic level at the cutting edge of their knives. And, the angle at which you sharpen is going to change depending on what knife it is and how it's being used and shit like that. But just even the basics, like the 5 key basics, like I'm talking about, will help make a huge difference. I think culinary knives, and I experienced this just in the knife making world. People are like, why the fuck you make culinary knives? Like, nobody gives a shit. And it's like, it's the knife that's being used every day in almost every house around the world.
Totally.
Nonstop.
Yep.
And people are like, I love katanas or a Bowie knife or a fucking sword. And it's like,
for the wall.
What? Why? Like, they have this mystique, but it's because we don't see them every day.
Sure.
And because chef's knives have become so ubiquitous to our everyday life. Like I said, they're used every fucking day. They kind of get put on the back burner, and that specialness is lost. But the reality is, like, it helps to have rituals around these things.
Yep.
And when you talk rituals, it sounds like you're talking about pagan rites and shit like that. But I guess it's more like a routine that's very special, and that is giving or showing respect and reverence towards something. And like the same way we treat our cast iron, I actually tell people, like, high carbon knife is easier to take care of than cast iron.
It's true.
And you know, you don't just throw a cast iron pan into the sink half full of water and a bunch of shit in it.
Yep.
Like, you take care of it because you're creating a relationship with that thing, so that not only are you taking care of it, but it's taking care of you next time you gotta go cook something. And it's the same thing with your knives. And as long as you do that with your knives, those fucking things can last forever.
Totally. I'm gonna leave everything in the show notes for everybody to check out. You'll give me something like a form or an email address.
No, I don't want anybody getting a hold of me.
Really?
I'm just joking.
0. Don't do it. I was gonna say, like, you come to them. I show up at your back door.
Right.
That's so funny. I want to pull up questions from Instagram if it's gonna let me show any. Coolest client that you've ever worked with?
The coolest client. I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of very talented people. And if you told me even, at the beginning of this that I'd be working with some of the people who I've worked with, I'm like, you're fucking stupid. Like, how's that ever gonna happen? And it just kind of does.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, but I would say the person that's really, like, garnered me the most attention has been, like, Joe Rogan.
Yep.
He put me on blast. He was actually talking with Guy Ritchie, and they were talking. I guess Guy Ritchie is, like, really into custom-made knives and shit too. And they pulled my stuff up, and they were talking about how it was made from some meteorite steel, or one set was being made from meteorite steel, but the handle material was made from bog oak. And Guy Ritchie was like, what bog? Like, are there bogs in the United States? And he was like, and Joe was like, I don't fucking know. I sent an info thing. It was Russian bog oak, for the record. Yeah. And it was carbon dated at 5,400 plus or minus.
Damn.
60 years.
Wow.
Fucking old.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
special.
Yeah, he was a really awesome person to work for, and it's interesting especially when you get up to, like, the luxury item prices. People are either like, they got their fucking thumb on you, or they're like, you do your thing.
Yep.
And he was 100% like, this is generally what I'm looking for, but you do you.
Sure.
And it was actually almost too vague, because having constraints in when it comes to, like, what actual style blade and all this kind of stuff is helpful and freeing in a way, because that's one less element that I have to try to figure out.
Yeah, creative constraints.
Yeah. And so he's like, this style or this length hunting knife and this length chef's knife.
Sure.
And then he's like, pattern, you do whatever you want. Like, I love your work. You do really good work. And then he put it up on his Instagram, and now I think he's responsible for, like, 30,000 of the new followers I had in just, like, the last couple of years. And it's fucking crazy.
It's powerful.
Yeah, the powerful JRE.
What's the best meal you've had in recent memory?
Best meal I've had in recent memory. That's a hard one.
We can come back to it.
Yeah, we might have to do that.
We're going to go a little more industry on this one. What can craftsmen or artists or creatives, I guess, be doing better to help the next generation?
I think the thing that people could be doing to help the next generation is not being stingy with their information. Like I said, the whole concept of competition is kind of a moot point. Now, I understand the whole, you gotta what is it? Earn your key, or it's like you gotta start at the bottom, work your way up, kind of thing. You gotta, but at the same time, like, like all the information, especially when it comes to like custom knife makers, I put out tons of information and people are like, I can't believe you're sharing all this stuff. Or I have friends who are like, you could be making money off of that. And it's like, the value isn't in helping people.
Yeah.
It's putting that out there to help others. And, you know, if I need help, hopefully somebody's going to come back and say, I know just the person, or I can help you with that.
Yep.
Because I don't fucking know everything.
Sure.
I don't. And so I think putting stuff out there and helping people with the journey, and you know, just informing people might also help them realize, shit, this isn't what I want to do. And that's
true.
Because
yeah, man.
In my time working in restaurants, especially when the last place I worked at was in Colorado, it was just a sports bar, but half the kids working there were graduates of the culinary school there, and they don't know what the fuck they're doing, or they're like, I hate this. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, maybe you should have worked a few jobs before you got into this shit, because, you know, I have all the admiration for you guys, because it's fucking hard work. It's really hard work, and it's hot, and you got all kinds of egos or just whatever flying around, and also like the human element and the customer service element. Like, it's hard.
Well, it goes back to like what you're talking about with like, you have shows like Forged in Fire, or like for us it's like Chef's Table, and it's like you can watch that. Yeah. And it's entertaining for 99% of people, but for the 1% that see it and they're like, I want that, it's like, that's not real.
Right.
I mean, it is, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a Saturday morning, or your first day off after a work week, and you're standing in front of your kitchen. How do you make your eggs?
Most recently, especially because I'm cooking with food for the dude, I'll do, or most frequently, I'll do scrambles.
Yeah.
I usually do a soft scramble. Otherwise, I'll do omelets.
Yeah.
Just because
like
they're easy.
Old school French omelet, or like American style omelet? Like, do you put stuff in your omelet?
Yeah, I load it up. Oh, well, and it depends. You know, sometimes I actually do it just like straight up open face.
Yeah.
I don't know even what that style is, but just
is there a
just
name
so
for
I can
that?
Throw more shit on there. Essentially,
I hear you. Load it up. I'm trying to think of how I can reword this for you. Normally, I ask chefs that I'll have on the show to name an ingredient that you're obsessed with right now, but you cook a lot at home. Is there something that you're like super into? No.
I mean, yeah, that's a hard one for me.
Same old.
Yeah, I try to keep it pretty simple. I think just working with good ingredients more than anything. Actually, one of my shop mates, he gives me a hard time because, you know, I'm half Polynesian. I don't know if that lends much to the fact that I eat a fucking ton. But he's like, I can't believe you're not as fat or fatter than I am. And I'm like, dude, I cook everything from scratch.
Yep.
And I'm working with like good ingredients.
Sure.
And
it's the only diet you need.
I love you, man, but you're eating all processed stuff out of the box, and you know, that has its place. And trust me, like, I hate up Annie's mac and cheese.
Totally.
But I think just working with clean, fresh ingredients. I don't know. Trying not to throw around buzzword, but just fresh ingredients, cooking from scratch.
Sure.
Working with good ingredients, I think is important.
Is there a book that's been particularly impactful for you in your career, or that one that you're likely to recommend?
In recent times, I haven't really done a lot of reading. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, maybe a podcast, because we were talking about podcasts before the show.
Sure. I mean, I guess when it in general comes to content, and especially podcasts, one guy I've definitely gained a lot of inspiration from has been Gary Vaynerchuk, who I think you were saying as well. And I think, you know, and that might be the reason I'm dropping so many F-bombs. Sorry, Derek. But he does a good job of inspiring through just kind of helping people recognize their bullshit. And, you know, he's helped put entrepreneurship on the map, and, you know, kind of, I don't think I'm doing the same, like, but Bob Kramer has done the same thing, especially for custom made knives in the culinary genre. There are a lot of people that really like it, or think it's, you know, romanticize about it. It's easy to romanticize really about anything, but until you get into it and get your hands dirty, it's hard. And I think what he really advocates for is self-awareness. And we all have kind of like our own genius, whatever it is. Even if it's fucking data entry, if you're good at that shit, you could make a lot of fucking money doing it.
People need it.
Yeah. And it's necessary part of it. Like, we all have our thing that we're good at. I just happen to be good at making knives. Something that links to kind of both the food, pop culture, as well as like the rising interest in forged cutting edge weapons and shit like that. So
is there a technique that you're still intimidated by with knife making?
I'm trying to think. So I use it when it comes to knife making, there is a process called dry welding. And essentially, there's like this meat glue that people, So there's stuff called flux that is used in forge welding that helps. The idea is that it helps keep things cleaner and helps things stick together better. If you watch Forge and Fire, it's like this white kind of salt looking stuff.
Metal glue.
Yeah, essentially. A lot of people mistakenly think it's metal glue. And so dry welding is forge welding steel together without any of that shit. And so the trick is controlling temperature, soak time, temperature, and then kind of the force that you're working with to get those things to bond. That's still, I'm making patterns, and I'm kind of like, some of the shit is like make or break because I need it for a custom order or something. I'm like, you know what, fuck it. Either I'm gonna totally blow this, or I'm gonna learn something. I mean, realistically, either way, I'm gonna learn something. So I'm like, why not? And so
does using that allow for different patterns, or does it?
It allows for different.
What's the point?
It helps to create cleaner steel.
Got it.
So that flux, it does, even though almost all of it will be released from the material, some of it still does get captured, and it just becomes an impurity in the material at that point. And so the goal is to help create, by dry welding, creating cleaner steel. And through dry welding, you can actually do some fucking crazy stuff, and I've been coming up with some new stuff recently that I've never seen, and it's not to say that I'm the first one to do it, but there are a lot of people who are super experienced in forge welding and pattern welding who have never seen it either. So it's interesting to see. And I guess to step back a little bit to where I was talking about sharing stuff, part of the reason I do that is put that out the world, help other people, but it's kind of actually done in a selfish way, so that somebody else, another custom knife maker, might take it,
sees it,
put their own twist on it, and I see that, and I'm like, oh fuck, and get re-inspired to come up with something else. And I think that is really important reason to share stuff as well, is to be re-inspired by people who are taking something you're doing and putting their own thing on it.
I just think it's dope that you use something called flux in your day-to-day.
It's not a flux capacitor.
Living in the future. Well, you could just put it in something and call that the flux capacitor. You somehow get a call right after this interview that you just won an all-expenses-paid trip to eat at your dream restaurant. And when you get there, there's someone you've always wanted to have dinner with, waiting to have dinner with you. Shit. What is that restaurant, and who is that person?
Boy, oh boy. I mean, I feel like it would be a bit, or I don't know. Anthony Bourdain has crossed so many genres through his travel, his writing, his food. He's just such an all over the fucking place kind of guy. An interesting cat. Like, it would be interesting just to pick his brain and just get more of his perspective on the world. In an interpersonal opportunity, like, sitting down, cocktails and some beer and some food. And then food-wise, I don't have a specific restaurant, but I've always wanted to eat Szechuan in Szechuan.
Totally.
I fucking love it, and I love the not just the heat. Like, I love the flavor of the peppers,
the sensation,
the numbings, I love it, and so I would really like to experience.
That's a good answer. Where can people find you and get in touch? Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, so probably the best place, I have a website and everything, but the best place to probably find me and see the most recent stuff that I'm doing is on Instagram. My handle is @MaumasiFireArts. It's MaumasiFireArts. A lot of people mistakenly, because MFA is Master of Fine Arts, a lot of people see it as, and because an R is so similar, like almost an N.
Totally.
A lot of people will see it as Maumasi Fine Arts, and you'll actually still find me by accidentally typing that.
That's so funny.
But it's Fire Arts.
Got it.
And but it's the same handle on Facebook, MaumasiFireArts.com. But Instagram, like I said, I'm usually always doing stories. As well as just kind of like I'm doing more to curate my feed, so I'm the stories is the background, kind of like the behind the scenes, and so my feed is acting more like a portfolio, and
totally.
So I'm trying to do more to keep that cleaner and more actually kind of more in depth, informative, and going long form with captions and explaining
totally
what's going on.
You put all the stuff in the highlights too. You could like binge watch your Instagram feed. It's awesome. Love it. Cool. Well, thanks for being on the show, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on.
I gotta say, though, Mareko was telling me just before we sat down to interview this that he was going to be on the Joe Rogan Experience just a couple weeks after he came on my show. And I gotta say, I was a little bit intimidated. The guy that I just interviewed was going to be on arguably the most popular solo podcaster show, period. How do I follow that up? But after listening to the interview that he did with Joe, which I still think you should listen to, they tease out a lot of really great stuff. I really enjoyed editing and listening to this episode because I really wanted to make sure that I maximized my questions to make sure that he would answer something that would help you. And I think he definitely accomplished that. So in typical interview fashion, let's get into some of my takeaways. First of all, the notion of giving information away for free, and more importantly, the idea of market abundance. Mareko isn't keeping his secret sauce stashed away, if you will. He will tell you exactly how to make whatever knife he's making. The knife itself isn't the product at the core, if that makes sense. It's his personality and his creative touch that he brings to his constantly evolving process. I hope you caught that in the interview where, he will take someone on the books and then weeks or months or maybe even years later, they will see something that he made the week before because he's constantly learning, and then they will request that piece in their knife. And I think that's super, super cool. It's also like that one-on-one interaction that's part of that process. And that's why his knives command the prices that they do and the demand that they do as well. Not because he can form patterns or shape handles better than you or I can. And I'm super guilty of getting caught up in this as well in the kitchen, being the best herb chip maker or the best duck roaster or the best snapper filleter in the kitchen. But what I want you to think about if you're in that place where you've started to plateau is how can I teach this? How can I pass on this knowledge and raise the tide to raise all of the boats? The next point I loved was his philosophy on making hunting knives. As much as I get frustrated to see people with all of their knowledge in the world and not sharing it, it's arguably worse when you see people that don't know what they're talking about and acting like they have they're in a position to share any sort of knowledge or create something when they don't have the empathy of either the customer or the place of origin, if that makes sense. That's the reason why he's not going to make a hunting knife, is because he doesn't, again, have the empathy for the hunter. He hasn't been through that entire process. And hidden in that point was the nugget of breakthroughs come when you have a problem to solve. And I think if you're in a rut, if you're like, yeah, I like food or I like cooking, but I haven't found something that gets me up and out of bed in the morning, find a problem. If you're invested in solving that problem, that can really be the unlock to help you make your next move. And lastly, I want to unapologetically plug something that he mentions in the interview, and that's his knife care clinics as my last takeaway. I want to share this video on screen for everyone that's on IGTV or on YouTube. It is something that I made. It's from a trailer that I created for him on the knife care clinic. So I had the pleasure of sitting in on one after we recorded the podcast interview, and as someone who preaches education and taking care of your tools rather than buying new ones, I'm all about putting this on blast, and I wanted to make him this short video to use on Instagram to help promote it. If you want to see the full video, it's on his page. That's @MaumasiFireArts. Again, at Maumasi Fire Arts. And all of the audio from that video is actually audio bits from this podcast. So instead of being a takeaway, I wanted to put that on your radar. If you're at a restaurant where you think that he could bring some value to whether it's your team or some of your peers, I think that would be super cool to have one of you folks invite Mareko to your place. So with that, this has been episode 82 of the Emulsion podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far into the show, please tweet at me and Mareko, tag Mareko, and tell us what you thought. I'm super, super grateful for your ears. My name is Justin Khanna. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to the Emulsion podcast. I appreciate your ears more than you know. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help sponsor the show, head on over to patreon.com/Justin Khanna. Other ways you can help out right now include giving this show a review on iTunes so more people can find it. I also love seeing you folks liking and commenting on the video if you listen that way, or even just share this episode with a friend. Now's normally where I would tell you that my name is Justin Khanna and I hope you have a good one, but you've probably got another podcast episode to listen to, so I'm just gonna get out of the way here. Excuse me.